You're a locker room problem, Delgado. What Coach Bricker never knew about the woman with his file, revealed at the booster banquet. The clipboard cracked against the metal bench 2 feet from my knee, and the sound went off in that cinder block room like a gunshot in a jar. I can still smell it. Floor wax and old sweat and the orange Gatorade somebody had spilled and never mopped. Coach Bricker stood over me in his crimson polo with the sweat ring already blooming under the arms, and he didn't lower his voice, because lowering his voice was for people he respected. "Here's the truth, Delgado," he said, loud enough for the freshmen lacing up by the lockers to freeze. "You're a locker room problem. Always have been. I've got a kid coming in who fits this program, and you don't." Scholarships going to her. Behind him, Peyton Vandersloot, the booster's daughter, the one whose father had just put his name on the new film room, stood in a brand new warm-up that still had the fold creases in it, studying her phone like none of this touched her. I was 19. I had $340 in my checking account and a partial ride that had just evaporated, and 11 girls I'd captained looked at their shoes so they wouldn't have to look at me. Coach Bricker thought he was closing a door on a nobody from a stucco house in Del City. He had no idea he'd just handed his career to the one person alive who would keep the receipt. He'd told recruiters I was trouble. He'd never once asked what I was good at. Let me take you back, because the ending only tastes right if you've stood where I started. I grew up 8 miles from that gym in Del City, Oklahoma, in a 2-bedroom house on Bizzle Avenue with a porch light that flickered like it was trying to tell you something. My mom, Rosa, cleaned rooms at a Holiday Inn off I-40 for $9.75 an hour and came home smelling of bleach and someone else's cigarettes. My dad drove a delivery route for a bread company until his back gave out in 2009, and after that, he mostly sat. We were not poor in the dramatic way. We were poor in the arithmetic way, where a $600 water heater in February meant no Christmas the next December, and you learned to do math about your own life before you were 10. Softball was the thing that was mine. I was a catcher, squat, loud, the kid who ran the infield because somebody had to. I wasn't the most gifted athlete on any field I ever stood on. What I had was a memory like a filing cabinet and a nose for who was cheating. In travel ball, I was the one who noticed the other team's 16U pitcher had a driver's license, the one who caught a coach doctoring a lineup card. My club coach, a leathery woman named Dot Reyes, used to tap my temple and say, "Delgado sees the whole board." I thought it was a small thing. It turned out to be the whole thing. On my bedroom wall, thumbtacked over the light switch, was a faded blue second-place ribbon. I'd won it at 9 years old at a JC's field day in Midwest City, the 50-yard dash, beaten to the tape by a girl named Kaylee who'd go on to do nothing much. The satin had gone the color of a washed-out sky, and the edges had frayed into little threads I used to worry between my fingers when I couldn't sleep. My dad had said, the day I brought it home crying because it wasn't first, "Second means you were in the race that mattered. First is luck and legs. Second is you showed up against somebody better and made her earn it." I kept that ribbon through 4 moves. It was the only trophy in the house that wasn't for something my father had lost. I got to the university on a partial athletic scholarship worth about $14,000 a year. Not a full ride, never a full ride for a catcher with a .291 average and no home run swing. The rest I stitched together with a federal Pell Grant, a work-study job scanning IDs at the rec center for $8.50 an hour, and a student loan I signed at 18 with a pen that barely worked. I was the first Delgado to see the inside of a college classroom that wasn't a GED night course. I chose a major nobody in my family could pronounce, sport management, with a minor in what they called regulatory compliance. I picked it because of a single guest lecture in my second week, given by a woman from the conference compliance office named Odalis Marine, who stood up in a gray blazer and explained how the rules that govern college sports are the only thing standing between a kid like me and a machine that would chew her up for a booster's signature. I sat in the third row, and something in my chest clicked into place like a seatbelt. I met Coach Bricker my sophomore year, when he took over the program after the old coach retired. The first season, I'll be honest with you, was good. He learned my name in a day. He called my mother Mrs. Delgado and meant it. He put me at the front of the batting order in the team photo and told a reporter from the Oklahoman that I was the smartest catcher in the conference, a coach on the field. I believed every word, because when a man with power tells a kid from Bazell Avenue that she's smart, she'll follow him off a cliff. I captained the team as a junior. I organized the study hall. I was the one the freshmen cried to. I built, without meaning to, a reputation as the girl who knew the rules and kept the room straight. And I never once guessed that the same reputation would be the knife he'd try to gut me with. The erosion didn't come all at once. It came like water finding cracks. The first wrong note was a recruit named Peyton Vandersloot. She showed up on an unofficial visit in the fall of my junior year in a car that cost more than my parents' house, and Coach Bricker walked her around the facility like she was already signed. That's normal. Coaches court players. What wasn't normal was the Friday I stayed late to reorganize the equipment room and saw her father, Gil Vandersloot, in Bricker's office at 9:40 p.m., sliding a folder across the desk. 2 weeks later, the athletic department announced a generous gift from the Vandersloot family to fund a $1.2 million film and recovery suite. 2 weeks after that, Peyton committed. I filed it away. I didn't have a name for it yet. I just had that old itch, the Dot Reyes itch, the one that said, something on this board doesn't add up. The second wrong note was money. In March, one of our pitchers, a quiet freshman named Bree, showed up to practice in a new Ford Bronco. Bree's mom raised 3 kids on a nurse's aide salary in Lawton. I asked Bree, gently, over a shared bag of Tuckies in the training room, how she swung it. She got cagey and said Coach had hooked her up with a booster who does car stuff. I wrote the date on the back of a receipt and put it in a shoebox under my bed, next to the ribbon. I didn't know I was building a case. I thought I was just being myself, the girl who couldn't not notice. The third wrong note was the texts. Coach Bricker ran a lot of his recruiting off a personal cell, which by itself is normal, but he'd forward things to team group chats sometimes, and once, in October, he fat-thumbed a message meant for a booster into the captain's chat by mistake. It said, "Tell Gil the Peyton situation is handled. Kid's got a spot. Just need the wire to clear before signing day." He deleted it 4 minutes later. But I had already screenshotted it, the way I screenshotted everything, because a catcher learns young that the umpire forgets and the tape doesn't. That screenshot went into a folder on my laptop I'd labeled, without irony, MISC. The fourth wrong note was me. Over that year, I went from captain to inconvenience. I asked in a team meeting why we were doing captain's practices in July that sure looked like coach-supervised workouts the rulebook didn't allow. Bricker laughed it off in the room and found me in the hallway after and put a hand flat on the cinder block beside my head. "You want to lawyer my program, Delgado?" he said, quiet for once. "Careful, smart mouths ride the bench." That was the day I understood that the thing he'd praised in me, that I saw the whole board, had curdled in his mouth into a threat. I went home and lay on my childhood bed at my mom's and worried the frayed edge of that blue ribbon between my thumb and finger until I fell asleep. Second means you showed up against somebody better and made him earn it, I told myself, and I didn't yet know how literally I'd get to prove it. Then came the boiling point, the scene I opened with, except now you know what was underneath it. It was a Tuesday in April, the week before we'd have set the roster for the postseason. Signing day for Peyton had come and gone. The wire, whatever it was, had cleared. Coach Bricker called me into the locker room after conditioning. Not his office, the locker room, where an audience was guaranteed. And cut me. Not benched, cut. Scholarship pulled, effective the next term, for fit reasons, he said, which is a phrase that means nothing and everything. When I asked how a program pulls a junior captain's aide 3 weeks before a postseason, he threw the clipboard, and it cracked against the bench, and he called me a locker room problem loud enough for the freshmen to hear. And then he did the thing that turned a wound into a wound with my name carved in it. Because a pulled scholarship you can appeal. What you can't fight is a whisper. Over the next month, when I called around to transfer, Central Oklahoma, Rogers State, a JUCO in Seminole, every coach got quiet the same way, and eventually a decent man at the JUCO told me why. "Frankie," he said, "your coach is telling people you're a locker room cancer, divisive, a problem in the room. Nobody wants to import that." Bricker had salted the earth. He'd taken the one asset a poor kid brings to the table, her reputation, and he'd poisoned it to cover the fact that he'd sold my roster spot for a film room. I lost the scholarship, the sport, and the season. I finished that spring semester on loans, waiting tables at a Cracker Barrel off Sooner Road for $2.13 an hour, plus tips. And some nights my car, a 2004 Corolla with 190,000 miles, wouldn't turn over on the first try, and I'd sit in the lot pumping the gas and thinking about a man in a crimson polo who slept just fine. I want to tell you I cried. I did, twice. But crying isn't where the story turned. The story turned in the Cracker Barrel parking lot in June at 11 p.m. under a buzzing sodium light, when I stopped feeling the hot, wet grief and felt instead something cold and level, like a bubble finding the center of a spirit level. It wasn't rage. Rage is loud and stupid. This was quiet. It was the click of a filing cabinet closing. I thought, he built his whole play on the idea that I'm nobody who knows nothing. And I am, right now, exactly that. But I don't have to stay that. I made one phone call, not to a lawyer. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I had $211 to my name. I called the number on the business card I'd kept in my wallet for 2 years, the one Odalis Marin had handed out after that guest lecture, the woman from the conference compliance office in the gray blazer. She answered on the 4th ring. I said, "You probably don't remember me. 3rd row, the girl who asked about booster gifts. I think my coach is committing violations, and I think I can prove some of it. And I need to know how a person becomes someone who gets to do something about that." There was a pause. Then Odalis said, "Come to Kansas City, bring what you've got, and bring a notebook. You're going to need to learn how we actually do this." That call started the machine, but the machine took years, and I want you to sit in those years with me, because revenge that's worth anything is never a lightning bolt. It's a slow closing door. I didn't go back to softball. I transferred my compliance minor into a major and finished my degree at the University of Central Oklahoma in 18 months, working nights, driving that Corolla until the transmission finally quit, and I bought a used Honda Civic with 96,000 miles for $6,400 on a note I paid off in 2 years. I interned at the conference compliance office the summer after graduation, unpaid, sleeping on Odalis's fold-out couch in Overland Park to save on rent. I learned the machinery from the inside, what a level 1 violation is versus a level 2, how impermissible benefits get documented, how a booster's gift becomes an NCAA case, how the paper trail is the only thing that matters, because in this world, if it isn't in the file, it didn't happen. Odalis became the closest thing I had to a mentor and the closest thing I'd had to an older sister. She was tough on me in a way that felt like being loved. "You don't get to be angry in this job," she told me once, sliding a case file across her desk. Angry investigators cut corners and lose cases. You get to be right. Right is slower. Right doesn't lose. I got hired full-time as an assistant compliance investigator in 2017. I got promoted to investigator in 2019. And here is the plain language version of the card I was holding, the one I want you to have clear in your head before the banquet, because it's the whole point. I became the person whose actual job is to investigate cheating in college athletics for the conference. The woman Coach Bricker called a locker room problem and ran out of the sport, grew up to be the official the sport sends to take coaches apart when they break the rules. And in a locked drawer of case files, reopened legitimately by the book, because a booster named Gil Vandersloot's name kept surfacing in 3 other complaints, sat a folder with Coach Bricker's recruiting violations documented, dated, and corroborated. Not by me alone. That was the discipline Odalis drilled into me. I never once worked my own vendetta case. I couldn't. I was a witness, conflicted out, so I did the harder, colder thing. I made sure the case was so clean that it didn't need me. I handed my shoebox, the screenshots, the dates on the backs of receipts, Breeze Bronco, the fat-thumbed text about the wire, to the office as a witness, recused myself, and let colleagues who'd never heard of my grief build it into something a man could not throw across a room. The quiet preparation took 2 years, and it was the least dramatic thing you can imagine. It was subpoenaed bank records showing a $47,000 auto lease that traced from a Vandersloot LLC to a freshman pitcher's Bronco. It was Gil Vandersloot's $1.2 million film room gift cross-referenced against Peyton's commitment timeline, a textbook pay-for-play if the dates lined up, and they lined up like dominoes. It was interviews. Dozens, conducted by investigators who weren't me, with a former assistant coach on Bricker's staff named Trevor, who had left the program in disgust and been sitting for 3 years on everything he'd seen. Trevor was the conscience witness, the one who'd quietly taken the right side long before there was any reward in it. He'd tried to report the July captain's practices himself back when they happened, and been told by an athletic director to mind his lane. When our office called him, he exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath since 2015 and said, "I wondered when somebody would finally ask the right questions." Trevor gave us the practice logs. Trevor gave us the recruiting calendar Bricker kept off the books. Trevor, it turned out, had a filing cabinet memory of his own. Odalis ran point. I stayed in my lane, exactly as trained, and the discipline of it nearly killed me. Knowing everything, touching none of it, watching the case mature like a slow fruit. There was one night going through unrelated files at 1 a.m. in the Overland Park office with the radio left on low to a classic country station nobody had turned off, that I took the old blue ribbon out of my bag. I carried it now, a grown woman, in the inside pocket of my work tote, and set it on the desk under the lamp. The satin had gone nearly white. Second is you showed up against somebody better and made him earn it. I looked at it and thought, he was never better. He was just first, once, at cheating. And I put it back in the pocket and kept reading. The case reached its finding in the fall of 2022. The conference and the NCAA enforcement staff agreed. Level 1 violations, impermissible booster benefits, recruiting inducements, a pay-for-play arrangement tying the Vandersloot gift to a roster spot. Unauthorized coaching activities, and, this is the one that made me put my hand over my mouth, a finding of unethical conduct for retaliating against a student-athlete who raised concerns because Trevor's testimony and my documented, recused complaint showed a pattern of Bricker punishing players who questioned the program. My own cut had become evidence, not of my problem, but of his. The notice of allegations went out quietly in October. The hearing was set, and then, because the universe has a sense of theater, the timing landed on a single night in November. The sanctions decision and the public disclosure came due the same week as the athletic department's biggest event of the year, the Booster Banquet. You have to understand what the Booster Banquet is in Norman, Oklahoma. It's held every November in the Sam Viersen Gymnastics Center's converted ballroom. $500 a plate, crimson tablecloths, a silent auction with a signed helmet and a golf trip. 600 of the wealthiest donors in the state in blazers the color of dried blood. It's where the athletic director thanks the men who write the checks and where coaches are trotted out like prize horses. Coach Bricker was going to be honored that night. 12 years of service, a plaque, a standing ovation from Gil Vandersloot's table. He didn't know the sanctions were landing. The department knew the notice existed, but had been told by counsel that the final decision was pending. They chose to hold the banquet anyway, betting it would blow over. The system, right up to the last hour, was still standing next to him. That's the part people forget. The machine protects its own until the exact second protecting them costs more than dropping them. I was there. Not as a guest. Investigators don't attend the banquets of programs they've charged. I was there because the conference sends a liaison to formally deliver a final sanctions decision to an institution when the timing is sensitive. And Odalis, who had every right to send anyone, looked at me across her desk that morning and said, "You built your whole adult life to be able to walk into that room clean. You're conflicted out of the case. You are not conflicted out of doing your job. Go do your job. Buy the book. And Frankie, wear the gray blazer." I wore the gray blazer. I walked into that ballroom at 8:15 p.m. with a sealed envelope and Odalis 2 steps behind me, and the first thing I smelled was crimson carnations and prime rib, and the first thing I heard was Coach Bricker's laugh. He was at the head table in a charcoal suit, 20 pounds heavier and grayer at the temples than the man who'd thrown a clipboard, telling a story with his hands. Gil Vandersloot sat to his right. Peyton, older now, sat beside her father in a dress that cost more than my first car. The athletic director, a careful man named Whit Callahan, saw me first, saw the gray blazer, saw Odalis, and the color went out of his face, because Whit knew exactly what a conference compliance officer walking into a banquet with a sealed envelope means. He rose to intercept us. Odalis handed him the envelope and said quietly the sentence we'd rehearsed. The conference has reached a final decision. Enforcement staff and the Committee on Infractions concur. We're informing the institution before it becomes public at 7 tomorrow morning. You'll want to read it before you give any speeches. Whit Callahan opened the envelope at his own table with a butter knife because his hands weren't steady enough for the flap. I watched him read. I watched him get to page 2, Level 1, Show Cause. And I watched him lift his eyes and find Coach Bricker across 10 feet of crimson linen, and in that look was the exact moment the machine stopped protecting its own. Bricker felt it before he understood it, the way animals feel weather. His story trailed off. He looked at Whit, then at the envelope, then at me. And here's the thing, he didn't recognize me. 12 years, a gray blazer, and the confidence of a woman who'd finished the race. His eyes slid over me like I was catering. So I stepped forward, into the light of the head table, and I said the only sentence I'd allowed myself, the one that stayed inside the rules because I was there as an officer of the conference and nothing more. Coach Bricker, Frankie Delgado, I was a locker room problem once. You'll want to read what's on page 4. The blood left his face in a single sheet. I have never, before or since, watched a man understand his entire life at once. He knew the name. He knew, in the space of 2 seconds, exactly which junior catcher he'd cut for a booster's daughter, exactly what a person like that would have become to be standing in a gray blazer at his banquet, handing his boss a Level 1 finding. Page 4 was the retaliation count. the unethical conduct finding built partly on the record of what he'd done to me. He'd written that page himself 11 years earlier with a thrown clipboard and a loud, ugly word. He stood up. His chair went over backward and cracked against the parquet, and the sound went off in that ballroom exactly the way the clipboard had gone off in that locker room. And I felt something in my chest go level and quiet and done. Gil Vandersloot was already pulling his hand back from Bricker's shoulder, like the man had gone hot. Peyton was staring at her father. 600 donors had gone silent enough that you could hear the ice settle in the water glasses. He didn't beg me. He was too smart to beg the officer. He turned to Whit Callahan and started to say his name. "Whit, listen, we can—" And Whit Callahan, a company man to the bone, looked down at page 2 and said the truest sentence of the night. "There's a show cause, Ray. There's nothing to listen to." A show cause order, for those who don't live in this world, is the death sentence of college coaching. It means any school that hires you has to go before the committee and justify it, and no school ever does. It doesn't just fire you from one job, it ends you in the profession. The university announced Coach Bricker's termination for cause at 7:02 the next morning, 4 minutes after the public release, so they could claim they'd acted first. The show cause ran 4 years. The Vandersloot film room got its name quietly sandblasted off. Bree's eligibility got restored by the committee because she'd been a kid used by adults, and she transferred and pitched 2 clean seasons at a school that wanted her. Gil Vandersloot settled a booster cooperation case and disappeared from the donor rolls. And Coach Ray Bricker, 12 years a Division I head coach, honored guest at the November banquet, has not been employed in college athletics since. The last I heard, verified because I don't traffic in rumors, he was selling commercial insurance in Edmond and had taken his name off his own LinkedIn. Now, the part that actually matters. The rest was just arithmetic finally balancing. The conference cleared my record. Not that there was ever a formal mark on it, but the retaliation finding put in the permanent file the fact that I'd been run out of the sport for telling the truth, and that a man had lied to recruiters to do it. The university, on the advice of the same careful lawyers who'd protected Bricker until the last hour, quietly reached out through counsel and restored the value of the scholarship they'd pulled. A settlement that covered the loans I'd signed at 18 with a pen that barely worked. All $31,000 of them, plus the tuition I'd paid out of pocket at Central Oklahoma. I paid off my mother's house on Bazell Avenue with part of it. I replaced the porch light myself, the flickering one, on a Sunday, standing on a kitchen chair while she held the ladder and told me I was going to fall. We had a dinner, the 4 of us, my mom, O'Dallas, Trevor, and me, at a barbecue place off Northwest Expressway with cracked red booths and a jukebox somebody had unplugged. Trevor had a compliance job now, too. The office had hired the conscience witness, because you should always hire the person who told the truth when it cost him. He raised a sweating glass of iced tea and said, "To the smartest catcher in the conference," and I laughed so hard I had to put my head down on the table, because it was the exact phrase Bricker had once fed a reporter, and here it was, finally true, finally clean, said by a man who meant it. O'Dallas reached into her bag and put something on the red vinyl between the baskets of brisket. It was the blue ribbon. I'd left it in the office tote. She'd found it and carried it to dinner. "You should do something with this," she said. "You've been carrying it for 15 years. The satin was nearly white now, the edge frayed to threads, my father's voice still living in it. Second means you showed up against somebody better and made him earn it. Except I finally understood he'd had it backward, or maybe I'd grown into the right version. I hadn't come in second. I'd just been made to wait for the results. I took a job that fall as director of compliance for a university back in Oklahoma. Not that one, a smaller one, a place that had wanted a fresh, clean office and had heard what I'd done. My name went on the door in vinyl letters. I have a real salary now, a house with a porch light that stays on, and a mother who sleeps in a home nobody can take. There's a softball program at my school. Small, underfunded, the kind where the seventh kid on the roster never gets an inning and sits at the end of the bench chewing her lip like the whole world already decided about her. There's a girl there right now, a sophomore catcher who reminds me of somebody, benched behind a coach's favorite, quiet, watching everything. Last week, I walked into their locker room, cinder block, floor wax, the same smell everywhere in the world, and I hung the faded blue ribbon on a nail on the wall by the bench, right where that benched kid sits and laces up, right at her eye level, where she can't help but see it.